In this video, we're going to learn to classify speech acts into 6 different types. So we want to recognize what are the properties that determines the different types of speech acts. And the 6 types we're going to learn about are called representatives, commissives, directives, expressives, rogatives, and declaratives. And the different speech act classifications are based on the relationship between the words that are used and the meaning of what's expressed and the world around the utterance, either the people or the place or the situation. So the first one we want to look at are the representatives. Representatives are speech acts in which speakers represent the world by making their words fit the world. It's a kind of strange way to say this, but this idea of the relationship between the words we use and the world around the utterance actually helps us to recognize different types of speech acts. So if the speaker represents the world around him or around her using words that fit what exists in that situation, we call that a representative speech act. So imagine the situation where the man is having some soup, and then there's a fly that lands in the soup, and he calls out, "Waiter, there's a fly in my soup." Well, the situation in the world existed first, and then the utterance is made, and that utterance represents what already exists in the world. And that's what's typical of representative speech acts. The words represent what already exists in the world. But that's not true for all speech acts. In speech acts we call commissives, the speaker commits themselves to some future act to make the world fit the words. So in this case, the words come first, and then the situation in the world comes later. So imagine a young girl whose bedroom is a real mess. And she says, "I'll clean my room tomorrow." Well, the meaning of her words is about a clean room or cleaning the room. But that hasn't happened yet. So in this case, the words come first, the utterance happens, and then later the action that changes the world, if you will, to create a situation that matches the words. So in representatives, the situation in the world comes first, and then the words represent that situation in the world. In commissives, the words come first, and they commit the speaker to doing some action to make the world match the words they've just said. Now, a similar yet different kind of speech act is known as a directive, in which the speaker directs hearers to perform some future act, which will make the world fit the speaker's words. So in a sense, directives are similar to commissives, but commissives commit the speaker to changing the situation, to creating a new situation in the world that will match the words. In a directive, the speaker utters words, but then is directing the listener, the hearer, to do some future action to make the world match the words. So if instead of the little girl herself, the little girl's mother says, "Clean your room now," the speaker is the mother. The speech act is a directive because she's not committing herself to changing the world, to changing the situation. She's directing the listener. She's directing her daughter to clean the room. So directives and commissives are both cases where the words come first, and then some action happens to make the situation in the world match the words in the utterance. A representative is a speech act in which the situation in the world exists first, and then the utterance contains words and meanings that match what already exists in the world. Let's look at a few examples. So imagine a conversation between Jane and Steve. And Jane says, "My dog Coco's sick." And Steve says, "I'll take her to the vet." I'm looking at the second part of each of these conversations. Is Steve's utterance representative, commissive, or directive? How about Mike and Annie? "What's the weather like today in London?" "It's raining." Is Annie's utterance, "It's raining," a representative, commissive, or directive? How about between Ed and Faye? "The garage is a mess. Clean it up." Is Faye's utterance, "Clean it up," representative, commissive, or directive? Again, Mike and Annie. "I got a new Nintendo game." "Who from?" Is "who from" representative, commissive, or directive? Jane and Steve. "You've thrown away the newspaper." "I'm sorry." Is Steve's utterance, "I'm sorry," representative, commissive, or directive? Why don't you pause the video for a moment and think these through to decide which speech act type you think each of the second part of these conversations is. Okay, let's take a look then at Jane and Steve. Jane says, "My dog Coco's sick." Steve answers, "I'll take her to the vet." Well, he's making a commissive because he's describing what he will do. He has not yet taken Coco to the vet, but he's going to do that. And so he makes his words, he commits in his words to doing some later action that will make the situation in the world match the words that he says. In Mike and Annie, "What's the weather like today in London?" "It's raining." Well, the raining is already happening, right? So it's representative. It's describing the actual situation that's happening right now. "The garage is a mess. Clean it up." Faye is performing a directive. She's making an utterance that expresses a future situation in the world. The garage is not clean now, but she's describing what should happen, but not something she's committing herself to do, but rather something she's directing Ed to do. So that's a directive. How about the next one? "I got a new Nintendo game." "Who from?" Now this is a question, which is actually kind of strange. It can't really represent what's already in the world. It doesn't commit to some future action, and it doesn't direct the listener. In fact, it seems to be none of these. Similarly, "I'm sorry" doesn't really represent the situation in the world. It doesn't commit to some future action or direct the listener to some future action. So in fact, the last two don't really fit into these three types of speech acts. In fact, they represent two more speech act types. The first are expressives, and the second are rogatives. And I apologize, this word rogative is a very technical term that doesn't exist in English outside of the study of pragmatics. Whereas expressive, of course, is just a standard adjective. But we use expressives in pragmatics to refer to a speech act which is similar to a representative in that it describes something that already exists. But it doesn't exist in the world around us. It exists inside the speaker. So the speakers express their feelings or their thoughts, making their words fit their internal world or their mental world. So in that way, it's similar to representative, but it's not about the world around us or the situation in which we find ourselves, but rather it's about our mental state, something about the speaker's mind. But that situation already exists at the time that the speaker makes the utterance. Now, rogatives, and this word rogative was derived from the word interrogative. Interrogatives are questions. So ergative is a kind of speech act that prompts a hearer to utter words that fit the world. Basically, to prompt a hearer to then say something that is effectively representative. In some cases, it could be commissive, but the typical case is representative. So earlier we saw Steve saying, "I'm sorry." Well, that describes Steve's mental state or emotional situation. But he's already sorry, and now his words match his internal situation, his internal world. Or in the previous example, when Annie asked, "Who from?" Who from is ergative, right? And it's directed to Mike, who then is prompted to answer, "My father," or to represent who gave him, I forgot what it was, the Nintendo game, right? That's it. So ergative is an expression that causes the hearer to then utter a new speech act, which is generally representative, something that fits the world. Okay? Now, there's a final type of expression, something like, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," or "I name this ship the Chuomaru," or "I sentence you to 10 years in prison." What's special about these examples is that the relationship they have between the words and the world around is that both events are happening at the same time. What I mean is, in uttering the words, someone changes the situation in the world. We call these declaratives. Speakers utter words that change the world, making the world fit the words. So when a minister in a wedding ceremony utters, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," in that moment, the couple changes. They go from not being husband and wife to being husband and wife. So in saying the words, the situation in the world has changed. The status of the couple is now a couple made up of a husband and a wife. Or if there's an official naming of a ship, I don't know how it works in Japan, but in England, for example, usually a member of the royal family crashes a bottle of champagne against the bow of a ship and declares, "I name this ship the Chuomaru." And the idea is that before uttering those words, the ship did not have an official name. Upon uttering the words, this becomes the name of the ship. Or if someone has been found guilty in a legal trial of a criminal offense, and then the judge has to decide what the penalty is, the judge may say, "I sentence you to 10 years in prison." Well, before the judge says this utterance, the criminal has not yet received a prison sentence. It's uncertain how long he or she will have to stay in prison. But upon saying this utterance, now the criminal is sentenced to 10 years in prison. So declaratives are a very unique case of the words spoken actually changing the situation in the world themselves. So to summarize, we've seen 5 different types of speech act categories. Not 5, excuse me, 6. Right? Starting at the top, declaratives are those speech acts where the words themselves change the world, change the situation in the world. And it's the speaker who utters those words that causes that change to happen. In representatives, the situation in the world exists first. So the words fit the world as it already is. In particular, the outside world, meaning the world around us. And again, it's the speaker's responsibility to make sure that the words match the world around. In expressives, like representatives, the speaker uses words that fit the world fit the situation that already exists, but it's the situation that already exists inside the speaker, inside his or her emotional or mental world. Rogatives are speech acts in which the words fit the world. So in this way, they are similar to expressives and representatives, but it's not the speaker who then is responsible for the relation between words and world. It's the hearer, right? Because the rogative then prompts the hearer to then perform another speech act, usually a representative, in some cases a commissive. But the words themselves fit what already exists, the question the person poses, and then the hearer is responsible for making the words fit the world. In the commissives, the world will fit the words because the words are coming first, and then the speaker is committing to some future action that will change the situation in the world to make it match the words that have been uttered. And it's the speaker who's responsible for making that change. Similarly, in directives, the words come first, and then there's a change in the world to make the situation match the words that have been spoken. The difference is, in directives, it's the hearer's responsibility to make the change so that the world will now match the words that have been spoken. And that's classifying speech acts. Now be sure to check Manaba for some exercises reviewing speech acts and some exercises for classifying speech acts.